Hey, I'm Scottie Supple. I'm with Teebowah Games, and we made Fishing Vacation, which you can play on PC and Switch. Fishing Vacation is a love letter to Game Boy games of old, and there's not a lot of horror games on the Game Boy, and that's something I always wanted growing up. So I feel like my love for Game Boy and horror is just something that is made apparent with this game. Inspirations for Fishing Vacation would probably have to be short, scary stories that you would find on the internet. A lot of Inuit mythos that actually came up during development, and I looked more into that, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. That and just growing up fishing with my grandpa, and just thinking about all the spooky stuff while fishing, because fishing's boring, and it's you gotta fill the time with something. It's kind of funny that I made a fishing game, because I don't really like fishing that much, but that was the theme of the horror jam that we made it in. And yeah, hopefully I made fishing fun for people. The horror jam that Fishing Vacation was made out of was I think it's called Fishing Horror Jam 2020. Yeah, 2020. They give you a month, make a game that involves fishing and horror. And game jams are a really good way to having a mental block with something, or if working on a game is kind of stagnated. It's a way to get some fresh blood into your creative stream, and just come up with something that just kind of pushes you. And with the quick turnaround, it was only a month long, it really gets you moving. And trying to make a finished product in that span of time is really tough. But once it's done and everything works, it feels so good, especially if people enjoy it as well. The first thing I conceptualized when trying to think of something for a fishing horror jam, probably this scenario where you're night fishing, and as you're fishing, your eyes kind of scan the surface of the water, and you see something bobbing up from the water, and so the curiosity of that, what is that? Just having that move closer to you as you're fishing. I wanted to have that kind of sense of dread to be found throughout the whole game, so that it kind of blossomed from there, and you'll find that part in the second night of fishing. So it really started from there and then branched out. And I think the second thing I thought of was digging for worms and finding a body in the dirt, just creepy stuff like that. And I think a lot of it was starting off with creepy parts that I liked, that I think would be good, and then building around that, at least conceptual wise. For actually developing the game, it was a whole nother process of okay, what mechanics do I need in the game? Doesn't have to be clean, just make it nice and dirty, and build around that as well. So it was a bit of mix and match of okay, I want to have this scary part, but I gotta get this mechanic. Certain mechanics would bring out spooky parts as well. There's one part where I've got the HUD or the UI where you're fishing, and it shows you a sequence of actions without actually having to animate too much of a fishing line going out. Because of that mechanic, I was ooh, it'd be cool if I had a little spooky part here. And I think that's a really good spooky part for a lot of people. And it was just cool to see a mechanic bring about a spooky thing, as opposed to, not emerging gameplay, but emergent development. I guess the word I'm looking for is, but something along the lines of that. It's just really cool to see that in a game jam. When you only have so much time, you're okay, what do I gotta put in here? And it's you're kind of, you only got so much time, so you're thinking about what all you can put in there. And there's just certain things where you're okay, I gotta get this in here. And while you're making it, you're ooh, but this part would be really cool right here. And it's oh, do I have time for that? And a game jam is I recommend all game devs out there, people who are looking into doing video games, to try game jams, just to get their feet wet in the game development sphere, because it's really nerve-wracking and fun, and coming out with a finished product feels really good, something that you can show people, and it's a really easy way to build a portfolio. I think a lot of game developers look for finished games, so honestly it's the easiest way to get yourself into a real game dev job is just make your own games. And having that factor of certain time to be met, a deadline, I think that really helps push the whole process and really brings about some really cool stuff. There's a lot of game jam games out there that have some really cool stuff within them, and I don't think you would see that in AAA games. So it's a really cool thing that I think more people should experiment with. So in terms of creating the game for the game jam, there was a lot of things that were emergent from the design and certain things that came from the spooky points. But when you only have a month, there's only so much that can be put in there at a time. So there's like end game stuff. I think there's a lot of end game stuff that got cut ultimately. Just like certain areas that I wanted to have like more story parts, which I think in the end kind of benefited that they got cut. Because I always find that horror is best digested when you have more questions than answers. So the fact that I had to cut some of those answers probably ended up better, because seeing people have fan theories about what happened and like, ooh, this part, did they actually do this? And it's like to see that, and I didn't plan on that, and being like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Yeah, I did plan that. But I would never try to like confirm it when I can, because it's always nice to like have that be a mystery. But for the most part, like, people have like understood what I was going for, even though like I didn't really say that much. And it was cool to see people like use their imagination and fill it in their own way. And I feel like ultimately that's a bit better, because just having people come out with multiple interpretations really creates dialogue and, discussions, and it ultimately paints a different picture for everyone. I guess that's what good art is different for everybody and can be enjoyed however way it's meant to be. Throughout development, there was a couple of moments in Fishing Vacation that really stood out to me. Probably the night fishing part, where you meet the ghost. But there's one part I like where you woke up and you go to the window and you see your friend staring out. You approach him and he's like, "Oh, you surprised me." He wants to tell you about this dream that he had. And it's completely optional. Like, you can play the game and miss it. But if you do, you get treated to like a little spooky story. And it's kind of the first glimpse of the spooky to happen. And I really like that part, because I feel like that's the breaking point for what, like, because I try to make the game unassuming at first. Even there's a little bit of spooky stuff with the intro, but hopefully the expectations are subverted right after that with a goofy title sequence and funny dialogue, or what I think is funny. And I think that at that point you're like, wait, what? Is this supposed to be a lighthearted game? And hopefully people go in blind with the game, and that is what they experience with that part. So that's probably my favorite part, at least. I feel like not a lot of games do that. Well, a lot of AAA games can't do that, because you can't subvert an entire audience into thinking they bought a child game, and then, oh god, there's dead bodies and ghouls and mermaid fish people. Like, that's not allowed. But with a game jam, that's perfectly fine, because, it's a short game. The game is only like 45 minutes long. Working on Fishing Vacation provided a couple of writing blocks, because you only have so much limited time, and you've got these spooky scenarios, and you're like, okay, how am I going to make these fit? Like, what? It can't just be like, oh, and it was a spooky person in the lake, like, there's got to be some substance to that, because people can see right through that shit. So I think coming up with a story surrounding those spooky parts was a bit of a challenge. I was reading up kind of like water goddesses, and I came across the Inuit mythos of Sedna. Her backstory was really tragic, and I thought it was really cool. I was like, okay, I think we got something there. Actually, learning about that, Sedna and her backstory, which I won't go into detail, you can read up on it. It's a great story, but it's about how this sea goddess created all the water life. And I thought that was really cool, so I implemented that into the story. Turns out, like, spoiler alert, the uncle is obsessed with this goddess Sedna, so he kind of goes off the deep end, and his wife and child suffer because of it. So I made Fishing Vacation primarily as the developer, the artist, and programmer. Yeah, that was all me. And then Julian, our composer and sound effects guy, he's pretty much 50% of Teebowah. He actually came in the last day of the jam. We'd been talking about it before. He was going through packs because he was shopping some of his game, but I was keeping him updated, like, oh, I got this and this. I believe he actually gave me a song midway through. Yeah, it's like the tune you hear throughout the cabin. He gave that to me halfway through. And I kept telling him, I was like, if you want me to do the sounds, like, I can do it. I know you're busy. But that man plowed through them the last day. He was at PAX, and he's like, I got him for you here. And plugged him in. Good stuff as always from Julian. He always creates the great stuff. And I think that's the game jam way, is like, last minute calls. With a game jam, you're not always going to be available the entire time. There's some that are only 3 days long. I'm sure there's some that are like hour long, but I think that adds to the excitement of it. Just having that do or die, like, are we gonna have this? Are we gonna ship it without any music or sound? Are we gonna put that ending in there? Towards the end, when you're like fine-tuning everything and bug fixing and making sure the art's crisp, adding all the stuff that you might not have time for, it gets really hectic to the point where you're like working late nights, early mornings. And like, I think we finished maybe like 3 hours before deadline, so it was kind of a sprint to the end. And we still had bugs by the end of it too. With a game jam, it's really hard to do testing unless you have like a network of people just willing to play your games. But yeah, the scheduling is kind of all over the place. One thing I would like people to take away from Fishing Vacation is that even though fishing is boring, it can still be a little fun and a little spooky. A sequel for Fishing Vacation is a possibility. There are some directions that I'd like to go with it, with certain characters from the first one. And I do have certain ideas that I would like to expand upon. I mean, it could be flavored up a little bit better. Fishing could be refined. And that thought had crossed my mind when making a sequel. If people want a sequel. Because I'm always down for it. If the people want a sequel, like, if they want more Fishing Vacation, I'll take them to the lake.